All right, so this is operations with integers. Adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. So integers are our positive and negative whole numbers and zero. So any positive number, any negative number, that is a whole number. So like negative 100, negative 5, 0, positive 1, positive 6, positive 350. Those are all integers. So we're going to start with adding. And the first one is positive 4 plus positive 3. So we're going to look at this with our tiles. If we start with 4 positives and we add 3 more positives, we have 7 positives. If we do 4 positives and instead we add 3 negatives, we now can make 0 pairs. And remember, 0 pairs are just a positive, one positive and one negative, because together they cancel each other out. So there's a positive and a negative. They make 0. We circle it because it looks like a 0. There's another 0, and then one more 0. We are left with positive 1. So we can say when we add a positive number to any number, positive or negative, our answer is going to get bigger. When we add a negative number, like our second example, the answer gets smaller. All right, the next one is about subtracting integers. So, if we start out with 4 positives, and now it says to subtract 3 positives. I do have 3 positives that I can subtract, so I'm just going to take those 3 positives, get rid of them. My final answer is positive 1. I started with 4 positives, I took away 3 positives. This next one, I'm starting with 4 positives, and it says to take away 3 negatives. But I don't have 3 negatives to take away. So I have to add 0 pairs until I have those 3 negatives to take away. Now I have 3 negatives, so now I can circle those and get rid of them, and I'm left with 7 positives. Now I add 0 pairs because they don't change the value. Without taking away those 3 negatives, I still have positive 4 because these all together made 0. So I really just had positive 4. So after I take them away, I'm left with 7 positives. Okay, and then the next one is starting with 4 negatives, take away 3 positives. I again don't have 3 to take away, so I need to add 0 pairs. Again, this is all 0. So I'm still starting with 4 negatives because I have 4 negatives, 3 positives, and 3 negatives, and those 3 positives and negatives cancel each other out. They make 0. So now I can take away those 3 positives, and I'm left with 7 negatives. All right. Now I have negative 4 minus negative 3. So, starting with 4 negatives. Now, I do have 3 negatives to take away this time, so I'm going to take those, get rid of them, and I'm left with 1 negative. So, we have some concluding statements here. So when you subtract a positive, like these two, subtracting a positive number, my answer gets smaller. both times my answer got smaller. It went from positive 4 to positive 1, and then the second time it went from negative 4 to negative 7. So my answer was getting smaller. The second one is these two. When I'm subtracting a negative, my answer gets bigger. I went from positive 4 to positive 7, and from negative 4 to negative 1. We could also say that subtracting a negative is the same thing as adding a positive. So like this one right here, we could also rewrite this as 4 plus positive 3, and we would get the same answer. Same thing here. Negative 4 instead of minus negative 3 plus positive 3, which is negative 1. So we can rewrite those subtracting negatives if it makes more sense. Otherwise, drawing the pictures is just fine. So we want to finish this sentence. Subtracting a negative is the same as adding a positive. Feel free to pause at any time to record these. You can also stop, rewind, go back a little bit, but we're going to move on to multiplying. So, multiplying integers. I like to think of this as 4 groups of 3. So I have 4 groups, and inside each group I have 3 positives. I have 12 positives altogether. This one, I would say, is 4 groups of negative 3, or 4 groups of 3 negatives. And I always do the number inside my parentheses, or my second number, as four groups of 3 negatives. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Sorry, ignore my phone right now. So now I have 12 negatives altogether. All right, this next one I want to say is the opposite of 4 groups of 3. This that negative out front also can mean the opposite. So I have 4 groups of 3 right up here. If I took the opposite of that, all of those positives would become negative. So this would be negative 12. And this one I would say is the opposite. So negative 4 times negative 3 is the opposite of 4 groups of negative 3. So we have 4 groups of negative 3 right here. I'm not going to draw it again, but the opposite of that would be positive 12. So I'll zoom out a little so you can see all that. So when the negative is out in front, like in the bottom 2 answers, we say it's the opposite of those groups. Whatever is in that group, it's the opposite of that. But we can make some statements here. If we have a negative times a positive in any order, the answer is going to be negative, just like in this example and that example. If the answers are both negative, like in this example, the answer will be positive. And we already know that a positive times a positive is a positive, like in our first example. That's not new to us. Okay, so this first one, if I have 12 positives, and I divide them into 3 equal groups, 1, 2, 3, what do I have in each group? Positive 4. We know that 12 divided by 3 is positive 4. But now, let's say, well, we can think about this in a lot of ways. But I guess the easiest way would be to think about it as this. What can I multiply by negative 3 to get positive 12? Well, positive 4 groups of negative 3 would be negative 12. So this 4 has to be negative. So 12 divided by negative 3 is negative 4. You can think about it as a multiplication problem that you have to solve the missing factor for. For this one, I have 12 negatives. I divide it into my 3 equal groups. 1, 2, 3. What's in each group? Negative 4 is in each group. And this last one, you could think about it in a bunch of different ways, but if I have 12 negatives, and I want to know what would be in the opposite of those 3 groups, 1, 2, 3, these would all become positives instead of negatives. So my answer is positive 4. So, filling these in, when I have a positive divided by a negative, my answer is negative. If I have a negative divided by a negative, my answer is positive. Always. So, let's fill this part out. When multiplying and dividing, if the signs are the same, so if they are both negative or both positive, the answer will be positive. If the signs are different, the answer will always be negative. So if one is negative, the other's positive, or one is positive, the other's negative, the answer will always be negative. All right, hope that helps.